The Skylanders timeline. This is a weird one. No one really knows what the Skylanders timeline is. Even if you said the timeline is an order of the games that came out, that still wouldn't make sense. The timeline does not work out properly. It actually does work out perfectly until Trap Team. After Skylanders Trap Team, you trap all the villains. But in Superchargers, the villains are not on your side anymore. Their backstories say once they were in Cloudcracker Prison, Eon gave them a chance to become senseis, but they had to help clean the library in the academy, which took them 1 year. But they're in Superchargers, so that does not make any sense at all. Also, we have a special guest joining us for this Skylanders Unsolved Mystery, Serbian Skylands.
Hello.
Also, I would just like to say, I'm only talking about the games in this episode, not the stories or comic books that came out. Those probably have more lore in them, but I'm not going to go into detail of those in this episode.
Well, there is actually a possible explanation to this. Separate timelines. There is a theory that after Trap Team, the timeline splits in half. One timeline having Superchargers being the game after Trap Team, and the other timeline having Imaginators being the game after Trap Team. This actually makes sense because Imaginators do not make sense to come after Superchargers, so this could possibly solve it.
There are a couple other theories that could explain what the timeline is. One theory suggests that Imaginators was actually the first game in the timeline, but that doesn't make sense. Imaginators has to happen after Trap Team. It has to, because of the villains, so this one cannot be possible.
Another says that Superchargers is the last game in the timeline. It does not say when Imaginators is in the timeline, but it does make sense that Superchargers is the last game in the series, as Chaos turns good by himself and the darkness is finally gone. Again, the only thing that does not make sense is the villains being in the game.
However, to help us figure out the timeline, there are a couple of rules that we need to follow to make sure that we get the timeline right. The first rule is that Giants has to take place after Spyro's Adventure, since Chaos references that game in Giants. We also know that Swap Force has to take place after Giants, because in the final cutscene of Giants, Chaos's mom approaches Chaos, and in Swap Force, Chaos's mom is in the game. The final rule is that Imaginators has to take place after Trap Team because of the villains. We also know that most likely Superchargers has to take place after Trap Team because the academy is all broken down there. So the only games we don't know a specific place in the timeline are Spyro's Adventure and Superchargers. We know that Spyro's Adventure has to take place before Giants and Swap Force, but we don't know if it takes place for Superchargers, Trap Team, or Imaginators. And all we know is that Superchargers most likely comes after Trap Team, but we don't know any other place in timeline that it comes after.
So with all that information, there are a couple of ways we can make the timeline. We could first say the Trap Team is the first game in the timeline. After that, the villains escape and get caught in the racing events in Superchargers. Then in Spyro's Adventure, Chaos finds the darkness again and betrays you. Then Giants and Swap Force happen, and Imaginators is the last game in the timeline. This one kinda makes sense, but there are a couple more options.
We could also say the boring option and say that the games come out in chronological order, the timeline being Spyro's Adventure, Giants, Swap Force, Trap Team, Superchargers, and Imaginators. This is boring though. We want a timeline that's fun and weird but makes sense.
So there is another timeline that could possibly be the timeline without a split in the timeline. This timeline is Trap Team coming first, Imaginators comes second after that. Now we know that Chaos can break the villains out of Cloudcracker Prison, so what if he does it again and breaks them out and they're back in Superchargers? After that, Spyro's Adventure, Giants, and Swap Force is the last game, because in Swap Force, Chaos and Glumshanks get swapped, and we never see them again in that swap form, which means that this could possibly be the last game in the timeline.
Even with all the probable, timelines, the most plausible theory is the timeline split theory. It just makes the most sense. After all, it's pretty much impossible to have the last three games happen after each other. Trap Team, Superchargers, and Imaginators do not make sense. But when it comes to making a timeline, if I were to have to make a timeline with no splits, it would most likely be Trap Team, Imaginators, Superchargers, Spyro's Adventure, Giants, and Swap Force. I feel like Swap Force just probably is the last game in the timeline because of how Chaos and Glumshanks split, and we never see them again like that, so that's probably the answer. Well guys, hope you guys have enjoyed this video of Skylanders Unsolved Mysteries. Also, thank you to Serbian Skylands for joining me in this video. And if you guys have not subscribed to him, please subscribe to him. He makes some great content, and he's so close to 100. So please give them to 100, guys. And thank you guys for watching.